Right. Okay. Well, welcome everyone to my presentation. Um, yeah, my name is Derek Nold, and I'm a citizen of the Red River Métis Nation. I'm presenting today from Niagara Falls, which is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. And of course, many of them continue to live and work here today, along with other Indigenous peoples from other parts of Canada, including myself. So I'm not from Ontario, I'm from Manitoba originally, and I'm a citizen of the Red River Métis Nation through the Manitoba Métis Federation, the MMF. And as Michelle said, it's a special time, or was a special time yesterday. It was Louis Riel Day in Manitoba. And Louis Riel, for those of you who don't know, is our most well-known Métis leader. And very recently, in fact, I think it was yesterday, that he was made, now is considered the first premier of Manitoba. So it's a long story. Maybe I'll touch on some of that today, but special to me because Louis Riel is my cousin, first cousin, 4 times removed. And all my colleagues are probably are tired of me telling everyone about this, but it's true. So for those who don't know, I have to share that his cousin, Louis Riel's cousin, was my great-great-grandfather, Andre No. And so we're very proud. We supported him during the Red River Resistance, and it's a proud moment that Louis Riel is recognized as the first premier of Manitoba now, finally. So my talk is Ethnogenesis and Red River Métis Identity. So here's an outline of my talk, and we're going to talk about ethnogenesis, what it means, why the Red River Métis are not merely mixed race. So that's a misconception that many people have. And we'll explain why that is by looking at some historical events. We can't go into much depth, though, because we don't have a lot of time. But I just want to mention the events because they're central to understanding how did the Métis emerge as a people. I'll just briefly share what are some symbols of Red River Métis culture and share what are some common Métis names and why is this idea of ethnogenesis important to the Métis? Why are the symbols important of Métis culture? Why are family connections and names important? And because there is a kind of misconception, as I mentioned, that just merely people being First Nations and a European mixture, that somehow that automatically makes them a Métis. But I want to discuss how that's not true. Not in the way that we understand what Métis means as Red River Métis citizens. And I'm using the word Red River Métis to specifically point out, that we are a specific people. And so it's not a catch-all phrase to use Métis with, just anyone who happens to be mixed race. Though maybe originally the word in French did have a kind of that connotation. Okay, so what is ethnogenesis? And yes, there's a lovely image on the right created by OpenAI DALL-E through ChatGPT. Sometimes it gives you some really amazing images, sometimes weird ones. I like that one, so I just thought I would share it. But it shows that this is a process. It's very dynamic. So yes, there might have been mixtures of cultures involved, but that's something emerged. When something emerges from that, we can speak of ethnogenesis. So it's a kind of a creation of a culture and an emergence of a culture. It's very complex. It's very dynamic as a process. And it's not only the Métis who experience that. You could talk about that with any people. A lot of peoples that used to exist at one time in nations no longer exist, and they became something else, right? And So it is with Métis people, Red River Métis people. So it is driven by things like migration, social interaction, politicization of cultural differences. So when so one group realizes it's different from other people's, it might emphasize its differences more or understand itself as different. So it's through interacting with other groups that groups can acquire their own group identity. And it's a key concept for understanding the emergence of Red River Métis, who, yes, formed at the intersection of Indigenous and European cultures. And we usually say that would have taken place in the 19th century. Sure, you can find examples of marriages and children being produced from these marriages that were of mixed backgrounds, but we wouldn't say that they were, Métis in the way that I'm going to explain. It maybe just you would see them as mixed race offspring, and they would follow maybe some customs from different, maybe the European side and maybe some from the First Nation side, but it wasn't a distinct people that automatically emerged from these marriages or unions. So why are the Métis people not merely mixed race? Well, a really excellent author who has looked at this in great depth is Chris Anderson, and he discusses this question, very thoroughly. So a lot of what I'm saying today, I owe a debt to him. But he says, and as Métis ourselves understand it, that Métis identity embodies a distinct cultural, social, and historical lineage, right? So it's very unique, and compared to other Indigenous peoples, even before my presentation, you heard all the different types of Indigenous songs, and the fiddle music probably stood out, and maybe some of you might have thought, that doesn't sound Indigenous. Well, Métis are famous for their loving fiddle music. You can see in the picture here, and dancing what's called the Red River Jig. And yes, other, obviously, European peoples like fiddle music, like Scottish peoples, Irish, and this dance is a borrowing of Irish and Scottish dances combined with Indigenous dance, but it's unique to the Métis and how it's interpreted and what role it plays, and this, and it's you cannot watch a documentary about the Métis without hearing fiddle music. I would challenge anyone. I will bet $50, $100 that any documentary would feature fiddle music, but it's a certain kind of fiddle music, and it's a certain kind of dance called the Red River Jig. As depicted here, you can see in this old drawing from 1860. So in the 1800s, it was, you could find examples of this associated with Red River Métis. And Red River Métis culture includes language, Michif, which is a mixture of French and Indigenous languages. It's an endangered language, unfortunately. There are not many native speakers, so many Métis are just learning the language again. A lot of Métis, they ended up speaking English as their first language, such as myself, or French as their first language, such as my grandparents. And so a lot of people who spoke Michif eventually spoke either French or English. And there are some native speakers of Michif, but not many, unfortunately. As I said, it's endangered. Métis are recognized as one of 3 Indigenous groups in Canada, and we didn't get that recognition until the early 80s. So before that, we've talked about the Indian Act in our class. It didn't apply to the Métis people. The Métis became known as the forgotten people for many decades after the 1880s. It was, a time when the federal government did not recognize them. Provincial governments basically they were considered provincial responsibility, but again, they were not often treated well or recognized. And it was only until the early 80s that Métis were recognized as one of 3 indigenous peoples and with a distinct culture of their own, right? And so if you say mixed race to describe Métis, it overlooks the agency of Métis, their history, how they define themselves, their symbols, their culture. It would mean that basically anybody who is mixed race could belong to the Métis nation. But the idea of a nation is not just because somebody is mixed race. There's mixed race people all over the world. All peoples probably have, if anyone does their DNA test, they're going to find some mixture of some kind, or, most people. So it wouldn't mean that they have their own specific nation for those mixed race, parts of them, but Métis do. So I'm going to explain more about that. So to understand how ethnogenesis occurred for the Métis, you have to know about these historical events that they went through. So the Métis today would trace their roots to central Western Canada and parts of northern United States, not Ontario, except for western parts of Ontario. So where I am right now in Niagara Falls is not part of the Métis, traditional Métis homeland. But of course, we can live anywhere in Canada or the world. I lived all over the world, but it didn't change the fact that the traditional homeland. I'll show you a map at the end of my presentation where the traditional homeland would be for Métis. So we can belong as citizens still, even if we're outside the homeland. I have my, to become a Métis citizen, you have to submit a family tree, some documents, some records called script records to show that you are connected to the historic Métis nation. So not just anybody can become a Métis citizen. But anyway, what events? I'm not going to go into great depth because there's a lot here. But there were key events. Besides the fact that there were people living in that area of Canada, they participated in the buffalo hunt. So my ancestors were all buffalo hunters. I know who they were, and which is really great to be able to know where they were, what events they participated in. So events that are important to the Red River Métis Nation are, for example, the victory of Frog Plain, also known as the Battle of Seven Oaks. Well, the English call it the Seven Oaks Massacre because they lost. We call it the victory of Frog Plain in 1816. So it was between the Métis and employees of the Hudson's Bay Company. None of my ancestors were there, so we know who participated. So, but that event was important because for showing the Métis coming together as a collective and identifying themselves as a collective. And it was the first time that the infinity flag, and I'll show you what it looks like in a few slides from now. It was the first time our flag was flown. So when you fly a flag and you see yourself as a group against a common enemy, that could be a sign of at least group identity or a national identity. And we're a small nation, but we can say that this is one of the first key events that we participated in. The next one, I do know my ancestors participated in. It's the Battle of Grand Coteau. This was in the United States. So, Métis are nomadic, or we're nomadic. We're not. I guess I'm kind of a nomad, but generally, Métis don't move from place to place like they used to. But Grand Coteau was between the Métis and Sioux. So, of course, we don't like to see fighting amongst any peoples, but it's not true that everybody was always, all the indigenous groups were cooperating at all times. Just like in other parts of the world, there were conflicts for different reasons. But in this one, there was something like it's a remarkable event, and and there was only something like 80 Métis against 2,000 Sioux, but we won. And because we had wagons, and they circled the wagons, and they were able to, and firearms, and able to fight off the Sioux. And I know my ancestors participated in this. There's a whole list of names of the family. So about of those 80 people, something like 20, or at least 20, probably more, were my family members. So the most famous one is Gabriel Dumont. So I'm not a descendant of Gabriel Dumont. He has no descendants, actually, but I'm a descendant of his sister. And his sister was there, Pélagie, her name is Pélagie Dumont. She was there. And Gabriel Dumont's father was there. I'm descended from Gabriel Dumont's father and his sister. So, and all kinds of other family members, aunts and uncles. So it was not just men, it was men and women and children who were present. And the Métis emerged victorious from that event. So that was an event that, you know, someone asked, when did your family become Métis? And I said, from that Battle of Grand Coteau, because it was an event that helped shape, you know, the Métis Nation. Red River Resistance, my family participated in that. In fact, it broke out. The first act of resistance broke out on my great-great-grandfather's land, Andre No. I wrote a whole article on that if you want to read it. I won't go into the details about that, but the Métis wanted to make sure their rights were protected when that area of Canada was sold from the HBC to Canada. And Louis Riel led that resistance. And we were not given what we were promised. We were promised 1.4 million acres of land, contiguous land. It's a long story, but we won that in a way. But right after, John A. Macdonald sent in troops and attacked the Métis, terrorized them once they joined Manitoba, became Manitoba and joined Canada, to punish them for daring to challenge, you know, his authority. So that event's important. So those events, Victory of Frog Plain, Battle of Grand Coteau, Red River Resistance, key events in Métis history to help make the Métis who they are today. And, you know, to think of yourself as a nation, to govern yourselves. We were known as the people who govern themselves. That's what the First Nations people called the Red River Métis, the people who govern themselves. And they followed government political structure, something along the lines like the buffalo hunt, which was very ad hoc. So governance only existed whenever the need arose. So you hunted buffalo, you ranged yourselves, you chose leaders, you had the laws of the hunt. And then once the hunt was over, that disbanded, that didn't exist, right? But then you needed, maybe some threat arose, like the Red River Resistance, the threat to Métis autonomy. So you assembled yourselves into this provisional government. And so that's how the Métis worked. They saw themselves as distinct and a people, and they organized themselves. They were recognized by other Indigenous peoples as being their own people who govern themselves, right? So after 1870, the Red River Resistance, yeah, as I mentioned, the promises were not kept. And that was recognized recently, that John A. Macdonald and subsequent prime ministers did not uphold the honor of the crown. That's what the Supreme Court of Canada ruled recently. And so now they're trying to make amends for that. And we are signing, where we sign an agreement, a self-recognition governance agreement with the government of Canada. It just has to be ratified in Ottawa, and then they'll never be able to take away that again, and you'll have to deal with, future federal governments will have to deal directly with our government. But anyway, there's the Red River Resistance, there's a Northwest Resistance. My family participated in that one too. So I know all the names. I know who participated in which battles. I know who was wounded. I know who was killed, such as my great-great-grandfather. His name was Damas Carrier. He was killed in that battle. I know who was exiled to Montana, like Louis Riel was. A lot of my, one of my ancestors and his wife were exiled there. A lot of family members were exiled. They had their homes burned. They had their belongings looted by the Canadians when they came. So that event was a key event, and that's where the Métis lost, right? And after that, Louis Riel was called treated as you know, called a traitor and hanged, unfairly hanged. He was not even a Canadian citizen. He was an American citizen. How can you be a traitor if you are an American citizen? Makes no sense, but they hanged him. And that's why we have Louis Riel Day, which was yesterday, to recognize his sacrifice. I mentioned that the promises were not kept in 1870. A lot of land was bought up by speculators. A lot of Métis went westward, and then they participated in the Northwest resistance. A lot of my family members went from Red River, which is now Winnipeg and Manitoba, and they went west. And then 1885 is when the Métis were defeated and the Métis Nation was broken up. And so there were really dark years that followed. But there was still some people working hard as activists, and that's why we were able to get recognized in the Constitution in 1982, and now that's why we're part of the Truth and Reconciliation process, and why governments and Canadians as well are more understanding of who the Métis are and were, and they're learning more and more about them, just as with First Nations peoples. That picture, I say it's Louis Riel and some supporters. Many people think that was the provisional government. It's not. There are some members of the provisional government in there, but even Métis believe that it's the provisional government. It's not. So I actually wrote a paper on that if you're interested. It's in my, right here, this one, 2020, talking about that. But it's a very iconic photo to Canadians, and especially to people from Manitoba. They all have seen this photo. It's a very, very famous, iconic photo. But my great-grandfather was in the provisional government, but he's not in this photo. So that's why I researched it, and I was wondering, why is he not in the photo? He was a captain. He was, a captain of Louis Riel, but he's not in the photo. He was in the military wing of the provisional government, not in the Legislative Assembly, which is, again, a lot more different others than people here. But anyway, so, okay, we better move on. So here are some important symbols of the Métis people: the Métis sash, the Red River cart, the Red River jig, infinity flag, floral beadwork. So notice it's the Red River cart. It's not the Nova Scotia cart. It's not the Ontario cart. I heard of some case in Nova Scotia where some people claiming to be Métis were using the Red River cart, and they had they had it filled up with lobster. No, we did not use the Red River cart to move lobster around. It was for moving things like furs and pemmican, which is a kind of meat, dried meat, and it emerged in a certain part of Canada and was used there. It was not used, it was used in parts of Western Canada up from the United States. The Red River jig is not just a jig that was done anywhere. It was done specifically in Red River. The infinity flag, sure, it might look a little bit like the Scottish flag. Maybe it even looks like Facebook's, but we were using this symbol before Facebook, before Meta. And we were flying that flag, as I said, in 1816. There's other versions of the flag. And the floral beadwork. That was another name for the Métis that First Nations gave us, the flower beadwork people. So they saw us, the First Nations, like Cree peoples, for example. They saw us as distinct, and they noted us for our floral beadwork. So these things, which maybe there are symbols, that's part of the culture, right? It's not something that just because somebody is mixed race would have, and or claim. It's just as with the language Michif, right? You don't have Michif in Ontario. So none of these things would be found in Ontario, except for maybe like I said, the westernmost part of Ontario. There's a beautiful depiction of a Red River cart, and then on the back of the horse, some Métis floral beadwork. And I remember my grandmother and granddad had that everywhere. I always remember those patterns and seeing that. It was something I grew up with seeing all the time, even though they didn't talk a lot about being Métis. The food, the enjoying of the Red River jig, music, all of those things. I remember growing up with that. Okay, I better move forward. I'm probably taking up too much time. So here are some common Red River Métis names. You can see my name in there, Nault or No, there's carriers. So these are not all of them, but these would indicate, that very likely if you have one of those names, you are Red River Métis. So why is this all important? I'll just wrap up here as soon as possible. And because, just to say, if you use a mixed race definition of Métis, it finds Métis everywhere and it denies the more explicit peoplehood of the Métis nation. This is according to expert Daryl LaRue. And the genealogical connections to historic Red River Métis nation are important to verify identity claims. And there's a lot of individuals in other parts of Canada trying to claim to be Métis because they've seen our successes in negotiating with Canada. They're trying to use, definitions of Métis so they can kind of do the same, but they're using our symbols. So, like I mentioned, they're talking about Louis Riel, who had, but you don't see any of the names of those people on the lists, like I just showed you, or amongst the people in those historic events where we know all the names, right? We know who they were. So it's a collective history if you want to understand Métis, not a catch-all term for anyone who's Indigenous but not First Nation or Inuit. Yeah, so some people are using it as a catch-all term. Our roots go back to this area on the right, this map with the infinity flag. That's our traditional homeland. So you have to show your ancestral connections to the historic Red River Métis Nation, and you have to be claimed by the Red River Métis Nation today to be considered Métis. So other people could have these mixed backgrounds and have Indigenous ancestors. You can be proud of that, definitely. Nothing wrong with that. But you can't claim to be Red River Métis. Just on the virtue of that, you have to show some connection to the Red River nation, and there's a whole process involved in doing that. Right. Okay. So there's something like 600,000 people in Canada who identify as Métis, but only maybe 200,000 belong to Métis organizations, and maybe 150,000 could be really Red River Métis who are registered. At least there might be a lot of unregistered people. So registering is very important in proving the lineage. And so I hope you have an understanding of what ethnogenesis means and why it's important to Métis people and Métis Nation. Sometimes I'm saying Métis Nation, I'm talking about the Red River Métis Nation. There's a whole debate over whether there might be other ones, but those are our symbols. Those are who we are. If there are other peoples, they have to kind of develop their own history and symbols and show that, and as being legitimate, then that would be fine. Absolutely, take pride in whoever you are. But this is kind of a debate going right now, so I just thought I would mention it and help those who may not know what Métis means, or how we understand it, how Red River Métis understand